Hello, good evening. I'd like to thank Adobe and the organisers, first of all, for letting me speak this evening a bit about my work. I have to mention that it does seem slightly egotistical to talk about my own work for almost 20 minutes, but it's what I've been asked to talk about. So tonight you're going to learn a bit about how I became an illustrator, what the inspirations behind some of my work is, and also some of the process that I put into some of my pieces, and also some of the clients and the commercial jobs that I've worked for in the past. So Poke Studio is the animation studio and illustration studio I run from Cardiff in Wales in the UK. And I specialise particularly in character design. Now, characters have been around since almost the beginning of human history. Today, they're everywhere on the things we buy, the films, TV, merchandise, and toys. And I was trying to think back to, where do characters really come from? And if you look at ancient Egypt and some of the gods that they had in Egypt, dogs for heads, birds, and all sorts of animals. And the Egyptians used these to sort of inspire people and to sometimes keep the populace under control. Also, the Greeks, they had what you might call characters. They had the Minotaur and various creatures which are made out of part human and part animal. And down through history, there was characters in the fairy tales which were told to entertain children, down to today, where corporations and large companies have sort of understood the power of character to tell a story. In fact, a character is almost a story in itself when you try to think of, why does that character exist? What does it mean? So over the past few years, I've been involved in creating various sort of illustrations and designs, and I just will briefly just show you some of my character illustrations. There's a giant bear with no eyes. We have robots, characters out of some kind of video game, giant octopuses destroying the world, giant birds from faraway planets, rubber mice, more robots. I love robots. Giant clouds with smiley faces, characters sitting on chairs just having fun, more robots. What did I tell you? Funny characters in strange worlds. Characters contemplating the meaning of life. In a forest. Mutant toys. Having a race. On your food. More characters contemplating the meaning of life, which happens quite often, and in futuristic cities. So where does my inspiration come from? Well, I would think that a lot of illustrators and designers and artists would probably be looking back to their childhoods. You may not know it consciously, but a lot of those influences will come through in the work you do later on. So I grew up in the late 70s and the 80s. That's when I was a child. And that was the time when toys and merchandise for children was really becoming to the fore and taking off. So one of the first things I was obsessed by was Lego, especially the space Lego. I remember going to the shops and looking at all the boxes. Couldn't afford any of them. My parents wouldn't buy me for my birthday because they didn't have enough money. But even so, I still had a bit of Lego to play with, entertain me for a while. It was the beginning of the cartoon era, G-Force. Anyone you remember that? Yes. That was a Japanese cartoon which was translated into English. I loved the designs, the characters. There was different vehicles they all had. We have Captain Caveman and Hong Kong Phooey and Wacky Racers with their various vehicles. The age of Star Wars, obviously. As a boy in school, we were all obsessed with Star Wars, collecting the figures, playing we had sticker books and all sorts of things. And I remember when I first saw the Star Wars film, how amazed I was at the characters in the film and the designs within the film. it was also the age where video games came to the fore. We started off with quite basic sort of computers with the Spectrums and the Atari console. And then the Japanese, they started launching these amazing games consoles, Nintendos and Segas. And the graphics started to improve. I was probably absolutely blown away by that graphic when I was a child. And me and my friends, we used to actually import video games from Japan, or get them through different companies who would import them for us. Because at that point, the games for those consoles were out in Japan first. And we would buy the games. And when they were released in the UK, we noticed that the artwork was nowhere near as good. They used to change the artwork for the UK and American audiences. And we preferred the Japanese artwork. And I think that was my first sort of exposure to sort of a manga and Japanese style art. As I started to get older, when there was graffiti, I remember one of my friends taking this book into school. It just came out. It was about graffiti in the New York subway. In fact, there was an amazing program on, I think it was BBC4 recently, about graffiti art in the 70s. And we were obsessed by copying the various tags and the different styles of graffiti. We'd put them all over our books and everything else we could find in school, basically. So we got into a lot of trouble for that. And the other big influence I would like to mention would be sci-fi art, which was quite a big thing. And there was quite a few films out at the time, like the Blade Runner and the Star Wars films and the Alien film, where they had some amazing sets designs, which really stood out at the time. So, I mean, all for that period, as a child, I always used to draw. It wasn't a main thing in my life, it was just a side little thing, but I did enjoy drawing, and I did art in school. I managed to dig out, in fact, my oldest artworks I could actually find, as I sort of stored them for some reason. But in school, I was advised, I remember going to the careers advisor, and, you know, I said I wanted to do a bit of art and illustration, and he said, forget it. He said, that career is way too difficult. Now, all you got to remember, this was around the early 90s. And at that time, computers, the internet, the graphic design software we have today, well, that was virtually non-existent. It was a totally different story for illustrators. You would have to have physically made work, hand-drawn or painted. You'd have a portfolio, which you would take around to different companies, and you would have to be based in London when I was in Wales, because there weren't enough agencies in the other cities of the UK. So he said, forget to doing an art degree or an art course or anything like that, and he advised me actually to go into my family business, which is my dad's business. He was a painter and decorator. He made no money. So I did that for quite a few years after school, but I still did a little bit of drawing. You can see the influences there in my drawings, the sci-fi. I'd found some skulls, I think, and did a bit of still life there, and some more graffiti. As I got a bit older, into my mid-20s, I had the opportunity I earned a bit more money. I started traveling. I went to a few different art galleries around the world, and I got inspired again to take up a bit of art. And I remember this was one of the first things I started developing was some character. He was called Bob. I don't know why. And he lived in the world. It was based on the Japanese sort of culture. I'd seen some photos of Japanese houses where everything was jammed in because they had no room to live. And I wanted to create this world where this character lived in this environment with things everywhere. And around that point, I started thinking of maybe going back into having a look at having a career in art. I remember creating some pieces and taking them to some local galleries, and I got rejected. But then I decided to do a design course in the local college and university. And gone too far then. And I did a graphic design course because I was advised to do graphic design because that gave you more scope of different subjects which you could use, and you could develop skills in all sorts of things like typography and web design and such. And there was an illustration module on our course, and that was a point I started developing some of my own style, my own personal style in illustration. And I also got my first design computer, I would say. It was an eMac, which was terrible. It cost me an absolute fortune, and it was really slow. And in college, we had the Adobe software, which I started experimenting with. And I created my first sort of range of characters at that point. And I'd also created a Flash website, because all the websites were Flash back then. If you didn't have Flash, you weren't in. And I put these on my website, and I started to get a bit of interest in my work. I remember having my first commission, someone a tattoo of one of these on their arm, someone in America, and she paid me 20 quid. I had to chase her up for a month to get paid. So I kept on with that work. And in college, one of the modules was designing some houses, and that was when I first got introduced to 3D, which was very basic at the time. I designed some sort of geometric style houses and started learning the 3D software. Well, that's 2006 then. And I started then using 3D to try and develop some characters. And that was my first sort of experiment in using 3D of characters. And I found that at that point in time, there weren't that many illustrators using 3D programs. Although there'd been some Pixar films and stuff which was quite well known in the media, the illustrators hadn't got used to those tools at that point. And there was another one which I was selling as prints at the time. So even though I'd graduated and I'd finished university, I still wasn't a full-time illustrator. It still wasn't a viable career at that point. And I remember that one of my modules was to create a short animation, and I submitted that to Computer Arts magazine. And on the day I was graduating, we had our degrees show. I realized I'd been featured in the magazine. I can't find the animation anywhere. It's gone from my computers. But I managed to find the magazine, and I got featured in that. And almost immediately, I think it was the week after, I got a call from an agent who wanted to represent me. And I'd been to agents before then, and they'd all turned me down. So I was really, I was really happy just to get some recognition, I suppose, for my work. But that agent didn't bring much work in, as usual. So I got a job in a presentation agency. We did presentations for corporate clients, mostly American Express. And I'd managed to negotiate that I would only work 4 days a week. And I took Fridays off, and I developed my portfolio of work. And I remember creating a piece in my spare time, and it was Digit magazine. I'm not sure if that's still going or not. They asked to feature me on the cover, and they were doing a showcase of talent. But at that point, my portfolio was still quite small. It didn't have that much stuff in my portfolio, which I still wanted to develop. And I continued working on the 3D side of things, because I saw something in that. I thought that could take me somewhere. And I remember making this piece based on the Pac-Man game. And I put it on my website, and I got an absolute load of traffic from it. It got featured on a lot of technology blogs, because they were probably into sort of video games and stuff. And I started getting a lot of commissions for my work. And at that point as well, I remember that was when we had the big crash in 2008. And because I was working for a firm that dealt with financial companies, they made me redundant. But at the exact point where I got made redundant, my commissions started coming in. And they never stopped since. So I was just going to take you through some of these commissions, and just to highlight how I suppose I got some of this work, what the reasons behind the commissioners were. So this was one of my first sort of big jobs, I would say, and it was for a console called, I think it was a PlayStation 3000, and they'd seen some of my vector sort of characters, and they wanted to create an animation for an advert on TV. And they asked me to mix up some of my characters with their characters, and we put that together. It was quite basic stuff, to be honest. Didn't take that long to do. And we put it all together, and we created an animation where these hands opened out, and this world appeared. And Yeah, that was the first time I'd seen my character designs, which started off as just little doodles and drawings, and then all of a sudden it was on the TV. Another big job I had at the time was for a government campaign on internet safety. And they wanted some characters to demonstrate some of the dangers that children would face online, on the internet. And they wanted something quite distinctive, with distinctive features that you could tell what this character was about. And they'd seen this character I had created before with no eyes and just a giant mouth. And they wanted a character like that to convey the idea that you shouldn't say too much online. Children give away things like passwords and lots of information online. So here's some of the initial sketches we did. Now, amazingly, I went to a meeting with people from the government to approve this illustration. It's just like something you just drawn in 5 minutes. It was quite an amazing experience. But we got this going, and we got an ad campaign going. That was some of the storyboarding, and created this. That was my favourite character out of the campaign. You can see it was clearly based on the character earlier on, and I started to realise at that point the value of creating your personal work in getting commissions. There was another lesson I learned at that point was this was one character that didn't get to the end, and when you're an illustrator or designer, you often do lots and lots of concepts for companies and never get chosen. You take them right to the end, and that's it, they're rejected at the end. They pay you, so you're happy. But it is always a bit frustrating, so that was one of the ones that didn't make it. Doritos was another early project I had, and they'd seen that image, and they liked the googly eyes, and they were making some new flavor crisps for the American market, and they wanted a barbecue flavor crisps, and they wanted me to just basically put the eyes onto a barbecue. Easy money. So I did that quite promptly. So here's some of the process involved. So we did the sketches, and then it goes into 3D. Then it's textured, and make it nice. We had to comp that in with various different bits and pieces. There was a hand and a packet, and all sorts of things coming out of the packet and stuff. And it was made into the final advert. So there was a few other characters as well. And that was made into sort of posters on bus stops and billboards and things like that. One of my most difficult projects was one for a company called Odwalla. I don't know if you've heard of them in the UK. They're an American company, and they sell drinks. And they'd seen another googly-eyed illustration, lots of googly eyes. And they wanted me to make some googly-eyed characters in this world. It was all the seasons of the year. The problem was that this illustration had to be absolutely enormous. They had a tent, which they were taking round to music festivals in the States. And the tent was quite a considerable size. It was where people would go to chill out and relax and have a few drinks. And this had to be printed on the inside of the tent, but to a quality that was pretty decent when people would see it close up. And I can't remember the exact sort of dimensions, but it was something like 30,000 pixels wide, the picture. And my computer really, really struggled. It was taking 20 minutes just to save every single time. And you have to save a lot because otherwise, when things go wrong and they crash. So every little change took ages. So the picture isn't that amazingly complex in itself, but it took an absolute age to make. And you can see that it was made into this sort of inflatable tent. They didn't send me very good pictures of it, which is really annoying. That's another thing you'll find. Clients never send you anything afterwards when you've done it. You always got to beg them for pictures and stuff. Although once, a client sent me a box of chocolates, a giant box of chocolates for a project. So another company had seen this piece of work, and they wanted some more characters on a similar vein. It was a company in Norway, and they were making a range of dairy projects for children. And they'd seen this world I'd created, and they had a similar idea in mind, that they wanted to create a world of all the different seasons. And again, we can see some of the development process, quite basic characters. For children, usually they need to be quite basic. And then they're worked up with more texture. And then we started to create a world. But what they wanted was for every single piece to be separate. So there's a nightmare for everyone who makes, especially 3D illustrations. Can I have this on a separate layers? You don't want to hear that. Separate layers is a nightmare. So you have to start creating every single item separately and putting it together. So we created all different bits and pieces, all the plants and such. And we had to take every single piece had to be separate so they could put it together as they wanted to in their own packaging and illustrations. And there you can see the results of that was they were able to create their own packaging out of the various parts. So basically you're supplying a part set that the company can use. And they created loads of different varieties of that. Another job that comes to mind was one for a website called Fight My Monster. And a programmer based in London had seen my work on the Behance network, which must have been quite early on for Behance at the time. Must have been when it was just starting. And he wanted to create this game where there wasn't a limit to the amount of characters. He wasn't interested in having 100 or 1,000 characters. He wanted limitless possibilities. So we set about designing some kind of system where you could make all the different parts of these creatures and put them together. So we used Flash at the time, and we created some kind of program in order to compile different parts so that the children using the game could put all the parts together and make these various characters. And there was lots of different types of characters you could be, zombies and more robots and funny monkeys and stuff. And also we had a range of the merchandise and all the sort of promotional materials. There was a book. There was cards you could download from the website, and the children could download the characters they'd made online, and they could fight them with each other in the playgrounds. And that was the offices in San Francisco, which we put the character designs on, and adverts as well. So here's what we all come across if you work in the design industry, NDAs. So when someone says, can you show some of your work? You're like, well, actually, I can't show hardly any of it because it's all covered by NDAs. So it can be quite frustrating at times working for some companies. Often they are the best paying jobs. But it'd be nice if some companies would show a bit more leniency in letting you show your work. So we have to pixelate it out. Right, I was going to show you just a little bit of process as well. Behind some of the illustrations, just very briefly. So that's a 3D illustration that I made, and a lot of 3D illustrations rely heavily on using other tools like Photoshop in order to create the final image. So if you're going into 3D, you often find that you can't just make the final image with the program alone. And I'd found some illustration I'd made at some point in the past, and I thought I'd just adapt that and make something different out of it. So here's your sort of basic image. It comes out of Photoshop. It lacks a lot of depth, hasn't got any background or the sort of dynamics to it. So then in various 3D programs, you can take out different what are called render passes. That's a Z depth pass, and that gives you a grayscale map based on the depth of the image. That gives you a shadow map as ambient occlusion, and that gives you a glossy map. It's called, or it might have some other names in different programs. So then you go into Photoshop and you start mixing those layers together like there's no tomorrow. And you can use various masks and other effects in order to create the backgrounds and different depth and shading effects in your final image. Another one here. Now I was looking to get a tune effect out of a 3D program. And the program I was using didn't have a particularly good tune effect. And I needed to take it into Photoshop in order to get this effect. So that was the basic sort of image. It starts off quite plain. And again, you use a depth pass. And then you start bringing your various passes into Photoshop in order to compile the image. And there's a great tool in Photoshop that finds the edges of items and puts some lines on it, which gives you a nice tune effect. And then you can start playing with the layers, getting some more depth and color and different effects into your image. I spent a lot of time experimenting with different effects and blending modes in order to get the final result. And because it's all done in sort of Photoshop, and you can take the illustration from the 3D program, use the same effects in something like After Effects, add a camera in your 3D program, and you get some animation out of it with the same sort of look and style. So I just wanted to end on the future. I mean, some of the things I'm exploring at the moment is 3D printing. I think most people are aware that is probably where a large part of the future will lie. Printing characters in 3D rather than having to buy them in the shops. People will be able to download their own characters, make them in their houses. There's massive potential there to be explored in the future. And along with that, I'm creating some of my own sort of properties, character design properties. I've developed quite a few for different companies along the years. And I thought, why not do one for myself? So I got one which I'm working on at the moment, in Gameland. And I got some people working with me. And basically, it's a story about some characters who get lost in the video game land. And hopefully, that'll be out sometime in the future. So there we go. Talking about myself. Well... So thanks anyway. Cheers. Thanks for your time.